October 24th, 1944. The Vosges Mountains of eastern France. There are places on Earth that feel old, not just ancient, but indifferent. Places that do not care who you are, what uniform you wear, or what flag you carry. The Vosges Mountains were one of those places. The forest was thick with towering pine trees, packed so tightly together that even at noon, sunlight barely reached the ground. The earth below was a carpet of rotting needles, slick mud, and exposed rock. Cold moisture clung to everything: boots, rifles, skin. For American soldiers who had trained under the Texas sun, this forest felt hostile, unnatural, like something alive. On October 24, 1944, the 1st Battalion of the 141st Infantry Regiment, known as the Alamo Regiment, moved into that forest. They were combat veterans, they were disciplined, and they trusted the reports they had been given. German forces, intelligence said, were retreating. The Americans were told to push forward. Major Martin Higgins, the battalion commander, checked his compass again and again. The fog was so dense it swallowed sound and distance. A man could disappear 10 feet away and vanish completely. This was not ordinary fog. It soaked through wool uniforms and froze against the skin. Rifles grew slick in the hands, fingers stiffened. Still, the battalion advanced. What they did not know, what intelligence had missed, was that the German forces were not retreating. They were waiting. The Germans had turned the forest into a trap. Machine gun nests were hidden beneath fallen logs. Snipers were positioned high in the trees. Mortars were already zeroed in on every trail and clearing. Every step the Texans took brought them deeper into a carefully prepared kill zone. At approximately 2 p.m., the trap closed. It did not begin with an explosion. It began with a runner. A young soldier sent to the rear earlier that day for ammunition stumbled back through the fog. His face was pale. His breathing was ragged. "Major," he gasped, the road is gone." Major Higgins stared at him. "What do you mean, gone?" "Germans," the runner said. "Hundreds of them. They've cut the supply line, set up roadblocks. We're surrounded." Before Higgins could reach his radio, the forest erupted. Machine guns opened fire, not from the front, but from the sides. Mortar rounds began falling behind them, cutting off retreat. The Americans dropped to the ground, clawing at the rocky soil with entrenching tools, hands bleeding as they tried to dig shallow foxholes before the next burst of fire found them. Within minutes, 275 men were trapped inside a perimeter barely 300 yards across. They had limited ammunition, they had almost no food, and as the sun began to set, the temperature dropped below freezing. Night fell quickly in the Vosges, and that was when the forest itself became a weapon. The Germans adjusted their artillery fuses. Instead of detonating on impact with the ground, the shells were timed to explode in the air, high in the pine canopy. The result was something the Americans would never forget: tree bursts. When an artillery shell exploded inside a tree, the steel fragments were only part of the danger. The explosion shattered the trunk, turning solid pine into thousands of jagged wooden spears. They rained down without warning. Helmets could stop metal. They could not stop wood. All through the night, the forest cracked and screamed. Explosions echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of splintering timber slamming into the ground and into men. By morning, the forest floor was littered with broken branches, shredded bark, and blood. The soldiers began to fear the trees more than the enemy. They had survived the first night. They did not yet understand
that it was only the beginning. Dawn came without relief. October 25, 1944, Day 2. The artillery stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The forest fell silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that makes men hold their breath. When the sun rose, the soldiers took stock. They had 1 day of K-rations left, a few cans of meat, hard crackers, powdered coffee. But food was not the real problem. Water was. The ridge they occupied was solid rock. No streams, no springs, no way to melt snow. There was none yet. Their canteens were nearly empty. In the center of the perimeter lay a shell crater, 6 feet across. Overnight rain had filled it with muddy water. The surface was coated with cordite residue and pine debris. It was the only water they had. The crater, however, lay in open ground. Somewhere above them, hidden among rocks and fallen trees, a German sniper waited. The crater was already zeroed in. At mid-morning, a young private, barely out of his teens, could no longer stand the thirst. His lips were cracked. His hands trembled. He grabbed 3 canteens. "I'm going," he said. Major Higgins shook his head. "Don't do it. They're watching." The private did not respond. He crawled forward on his stomach, inch by inch, toward the crater. The battalion watched. He reached the water. He dipped a canteen. A single shot echoed through the trees. The bullet struck him in the neck. He collapsed face first into the crater. His blood spread through the muddy water, turning it dark. No one moved. No one could. The sniper waited. The body lay there all day. By afternoon, the thirst became a physical agony. Tongues swelled, throats burned. Men struggled to swallow their own saliva. When darkness fell, they made their decision. One by one, soldiers crawled toward the crater under cover of night. They pushed the body aside with shaking hands. They filled their cups with water mixed with mud, gunpowder residue, and blood. They drank it slowly. They strained it through their teeth. It tasted of iron and death, but it kept them alive. That night, the men did not speak much. They lay in their holes, listening to the wind move through shattered trees. Some began to wonder how long a human mind could endure this. October 26th, Day 3. The Germans understood that they did not need to attack. They needed to break the Americans. They brought loudspeakers into the forest, large amplifiers powered by a generator hidden beyond the ridge. Then the voice began. It spoke perfect English. "Hello, boys of the 141st," it said calmly. "How are you feeling today?" The sound drifted through the fog, echoing off the trees, impossible to locate. "We know you are thirsty," the voice continued. "We have hot coffee down here, warm beds, doctors for your wounded." Inside the American lines, wounded men groaned. Infections had set in. The smell of blood and rotting flesh hung in the damp air. "Your commanders have abandoned you," the voice said. "General Dahlquist is safe and warm. Why die for him?" Some soldiers began to cry quietly. Others stared at the ground. One whispered, Maybe we should just go." Major Higgins moved from hole to hole, kneeling beside men, gripping their shoulders. "Don't listen," he said softly. "It's a lie. If you walk out, you won't come back." But even as he spoke, Higgins knew the truth. They were reaching the limit. Men can endure hunger. They can endure cold. They can endure fear. But thirst, Isolation and hopelessness together begin to dissolve the will to live. By the end of the third day, the lost battalion was no longer just surrounded, they were unraveling, and still no rescue came. October 24th, 1944. Day 4. Late in the morning, a sound rolled across the forest that none of the men expected. Engines. At first it was distant, just a low vibration in the air. Then it grew louder, vibrating in their chest cavities. Men lifted their heads from the mud. They looked up through the shattered pine branches. American aircraft. P-47 Thunderbolts cut through the fog overhead. For the first time in days, the trapped battalion felt something dangerously close to hope. "They found us," someone whispered. "They finally found us." Major Higgins sprang to his feet, ignoring the sniper fire. "Pop smoke," he ordered. "Mark the perimeter." Yellow smoke grenades hissed and bloomed through the trees, marking the American position with a thick, sulfurous cloud. The planes banked. Metal canisters dropped from their wings, each attached to a parachute. Food, ammunition, medical supplies, plasma, everything the battalion needed to survive one more day. The men watched in silence as the parachutes opened. They calculated the trajectory. Then the wind shifted. Slowly, terribly, the canisters drifted. They floated past the American perimeter. They floated over the heads of the starving men, down the slope, directly into German lines. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavier than the shelling. Then laughter echoed from the forest below. The Germans opened the canisters. They ate American chocolate. They smoked American cigarettes. They loaded American ammunition into their weapons. And then they fired it back uphill at the men who were starving. It was not just a failure. It was humiliation. Major Higgins sat down in the mud. He removed his helmet and rested his head in his hands. "We are alone," he said quietly. "Nobody can reach us." But 5 miles away, another unit was preparing to move. A unit whose families were not free. A unit whose loyalty had been questioned by the very country they served. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Japanese Americans. Second-generation citizens, Nisei, many of whom had volunteered from behind barbed wire in internment camps. They had been resting after a brutal month of combat in Italy and France. They were under strength, they were exhausted, but General Dahlquist, the division commander, had run out of options. He called Colonel Virgil Miller of the 442nd. October 27, 1944. The base of the ridge. The 442nd arrived at the front lines. They were smaller than many of the men around them. Their uniforms were worn. Their faces were young, but their eyes were hard. General Dahlquist gave them no detailed plan, no clever flank maneuver. He pointed up the mountain. "Go up that hill," he said. "Don't stop until you reach the Texans." It was not a strategy. It was an order to die. The Germans held the high ground. Trenches overlooked the valley. Machine guns were already zeroed in. But before a single shot was fired, the first enemy struck: the minefield. The Germans knew the Americans used metal detectors, so they planted shoe mines. These were small boxes made of rough wood, filled with 200 grams of TNT. Because they contained no metal parts, the detectors were useless. The only way to find one was to step on it. Private First Class Joe Tanaka took the lead. He took the first step. Crump. The explosion wasn't loud. It was a dull thud. It tore his foot away at the ankle. He screamed and collapsed into the wet leaves. A medic rushed forward to help him. Crump. Another explosion. The medic went down. The platoon froze. They were standing inside a minefield they could not see. Every step could be the last. "Keep moving," the sergeant shouted. "Step where the man in front of you stepped. Walk on the tracks." They advanced over blood-soaked ground, stepping over wounded friends they could not stop to help. Stopping meant failure. Failure meant the Texans died. By the time they cleared the minefield, the mountain rose sharply before them, slick with ice and pine needles. To fire their rifles, the men had to cling to tree roots with one hand. The Germans fired downward. Gravity was their ally. Grenades were not thrown, they were rolled. The mountain echoed with explosions. The 442nd climbed anyway, because turning back was never an option. The climb turned into slaughter. The ridge was nearly vertical in places. Mud froze under boots. Tree roots tore at hands. German fire came from above, below, and the flanks. The men of the 442nd did not stop. They could not. Company K was pinned down by interlocking machine gun fire. Trees exploded into splinters as artillery rounds burst in the canopy. A soldier named Barney Hajiro saw the advance stalling. He picked up a Browning automatic rifle, a BAR. It weighed nearly 20 pounds. He did not crawl. He stood. Hajiro ran diagonally up the slope, firing from the hip. Bullets struck the dirt around him. He silenced one machine gun nest, then another. He was hit in the shoulder. He kept moving. He was hit again. He kept firing. He was not trying to survive. He was trying to finish. By October 29th, the casualties were staggering. Entire platoons were gone. Companies were reduced to half strength. Colonel Virgil Miller radioed division headquarters. "We need to regroup," he said. "My men are exhausted. We're losing too many." General Dahlquist's reply was immediate. "There is no pause," he said. "The Texans are dying. Take the hill." Colonel Miller closed his eyes. He turned to his officers. "You heard the order," he said quietly. "Fix bayonets." Steel clicked onto rifle barrels along the line. The men understood what it meant. There would be no more firing from cover. They would charge. Through the fog, the Germans saw figures emerging from the trees. At first, they thought the Americans were surrendering. Then the run began. One voice screamed, then dozens. "Banzai!" The sound rolled down the mountain, raw, animal, terrifying. German veterans of the Eastern Front froze. This did not sound like Europe. It sounded like the Pacific. The Nisei ran straight into machine gun fire. Men fell. The line did not stop. Private Sadao Munemori saw a grenade land in a shell hole with two of his friends. He did not hesitate. He dove onto it. Thud. The explosion lifted his body into the air. He absorbed the blast entirely with his own chest. His friends lived. He was gone. Enraged by his sacrifice, the wave of Nisei soldiers crashed into the German trenches. Bayonets, rifle stocks, helmets. The Germans broke. They ran. The supermen fled from the men their own country called traitors. October 34th, 1944, 2 p.m. The firing faded. Sergeant Takata pushed through brush near the summit and looked into a foxhole. Inside was a skeletal Texan, beard matted with dirt. He raised his rifle weakly, then saw the American patch on Takata's shoulder and the Asian face beneath the helmet. The rifle fell. "I thought we were dead," the Texan whispered. Takata handed him a ration. "Eat," he said. Behind him, more soldiers emerged, bleeding, limping, carrying each other. The siege was broken. The Texans were saved. 211 men walked down from the mountain, supporting one another, hollow-eyed, alive. For the 442nd, the work was not finished. They buried the dead. The numbers were almost impossible to understand. To save 211 Texans, the 442nd suffered more than 800 casualties, killed and wounded. They traded 4 of their own men for every 1 man they saved.
November 12, 1944. General Dahlquist ordered a formal regimental review. He wanted to present medals. He wanted photographs with the heroes. The 442nd assembled on a cold field near Briere. The formation was thin. General Dahlquist arrived in his jeep. He stared at the ranks. He frowned. "Colonel," he asked sharply, "I ordered the whole regiment. Where are the rest of them?" Colonel Virgil Miller stood at attention, rain mixed with tears on his face. "Sir," he said, "that is all of them. The rest are dead or in the hospital." The general said nothing. The color drained from his face. He simply saluted. It was not a parade. It was a funeral formation. When the war ended, the men of the 442nd returned home. President Harry Truman awarded them the Presidential Unit Citation. He told them, "You fought not only the enemy, but you fought prejudice, and you have won." It was a fine speech. Reality was colder. Sergeant Daniel Inouye, who lost an arm fighting in Italy, returned to California in full uniform with a chest full of medals. At a barber shop, he was told to leave. "We don't serve Japs." He walked out without a word. Many veterans returned to find their families still imprisoned in camps behind barbed wire. Their farms were gone, their homes sold. They had saved lives in France. They were still strangers in America. Yet they endured. The 442nd became the most decorated unit in United States military history for its size. 21 Medals of Honor, 9,000 Purple Hearts. They proved that Americanism is not a look. It is not a name. It is not blood. It is climbing a mountain in freezing rain into machine gun fire to save a man you have never met, simply because he wears the same flag. That was the legacy of the 442nd, and it still matters.